Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that you and your families are well and safe. What does Germany, New Zealand, Iceland, Taiwan, and Finland have in common? Firstly, they are some of the countries with the best COVID-19 responses. Secondly, all of them have women leaders. And so there's a famous quote that says that leaders are forged in times of crisis. But what happens when the crisis situation mandates social distancing and individuals are confined to their homes? How do real leaders adapt, leverage the situation, and use it to their advantage? We wanted to have this discussion, and I'm really have a great pleasure to welcome Caroline Stockmann with us. To give you a background about Caroline, so Caroline is the Chief Executive of ACT, the Association of Corporate Treasurers, since February 2017. She's highly experienced, has board roles, C-suite director. She has worked for 30 years in international finance, operations and governance and leadership roles. She has a strong grounding in all aspects in international finance, 15 years within blue chip corporations, and lately for some of the largest non-for-profits. Prior to her current position, Caroline held the position of Chief Financial Officer at the British Council, the UK's largest charity, and before that at Save the Children International. Some of the companies she worked in include Novartis Pharmaceuticals, Cadbury Schweppes, and Unilever. She has also been a member of the Finance and Investment Committee of the Elton John AIDS Foundation, Deputy Chair of the European Association of Corporate Treasurers, and the International Group of Treasury Associations, as well as being the President of the National Association of Corporate Treasurers. As Charlotte said, we'll have a discussion followed by a Q&A. And so if you'd like to ask Caroline any questions, make sure that you put them in the Q&A section, and we will answer them later on. Now, I would like to invite Caroline Stockmann on stage with me.
Thank you very much, Tram-Ann, for that rather overwhelming introduction. And thanks to you for inviting me here. And also thanks to Maria for helping me with all the logistics and getting things organized. So we've got a little bit of time for me to give some of my thoughts.
Yes.
And then we'll be moving on to Q&A. But what I might do, I'll start off with just going through a few of my thoughts, and I'll share my screen with you for some slides if that's okay. So
yes, I will leave you now, Caroline. The stage is yours, and I'll speak to you later after your presentation.
Thank you very much. Look forward to that, Tram-Ann. Thank you. So, really, lessons in leadership. It's a very kind of big title, but I think through these times, I think it will really show up whether you are leading or whether you're fulfilling that valuable role of following. But leadership, we've seen some interesting developments around the world, and I think we can say there are examples of where leadership has not been showing, and that's disappointing. But there are also some great examples, and Tram-Ann has referenced some of the countries where those examples are and the influence that women have had. But it's not all such a straightforward story. So first of all, just a little bit of background from myself. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'd like to just highlight the variety I've had in my life and the opportunity I've had for exploration with different people around the world, having worked and lived and visited over 70 countries. And that has brought a particular perspective to me. And that is why I'm passionate about diversity, for a start, in all its forms. I'd also like to highlight the opportunity I've had through that to become trained as a coach. I've also learnt from many great coaches myself over time, and that's been really important to me. So I'm going to try and share with you today a few nuggets, things that I've learnt over that time, and things that really apply today to the COVID-19 situation. If we then briefly just touch on the ACT. We're here because we believe in high standards for our treasurers, and treasurers, these are all the kinds of things they do. We don't need to go into any detail on that now. You can always go and look online at treasurers.org if you're very interested. But you can see from this what an impact treasurers would have in a crisis, and certainly under COVID-19. So the people I'm dealing with day to day, our members, are looking after cash, that kind of lifeblood of their organizations. And, quite frankly, particularly at the outset, but ongoing, liquidity is the thing that will allow companies to survive and will allow the economy to thrive. So, as I like to say, cash is queen. And that is something that is the focus of our members. So they are right at the forefront of what's happening now in terms of the economy. Thinking then about COVID-19, I just sat back and thought, okay, what strikes me? And I decided to write down a little mind map. I thought, what does it mean for me? What am I seeing out there? And I'm seeing some real negatives, I guess. Those are the red ones. And apologies if you're not able to see, if there's any color blindness. But I'll just go through very briefly the the areas that are disappointing, shall we say, are where there's been lack of transparency, protectionism between different geographies and politicians and all that kind of stuff. There's, of course, the impact of the disease itself, and many loved ones have been lost through this time so far, and more to come, undoubtedly. There's the shock to the economy. There's the fear that's wrapped up, whether it's to do with the illness or whether it's to do with losing one's job, or the uncertainty, not knowing what the future will hold. And there is isolation, of course. Some of the more equivocal areas, this COVID coast, this new language about how we feel up and down, from day to day. And I suppose the ups are good, but the downs are not so good. Working from home, virtual meetings, people can struggle with them, but they can have great advantages. And then, of course, there are those things coming through. We're seeing potentially more contact with people around the world. We are discovering new skills. We're learning new things. There's a kind of solidarity and humor out there. All the memes I get every day, people are making jokes about the situation, and we like to turn it into a kind of humor sometimes when we're in these extreme circumstances. And there's also, just underneath it all, this idea of going back to our values. And I'd like to take each of these and say, as a leader, I lead my organization. Um, what is the impact of them, or what are the actions I would be taking? And lead you through those, um, and connect them to some of the coaching tools I found very successful in the past and I find particularly applicable to today. So this is the new map, and this is showing the kinds of impacts around each of those points earlier. So this thing about lack of transparency, it is really important for leaders now to be transparent in their decision making. Recently, I discovered that some of my team were concerned about having to go back to work. So we talked about it in an all staff meeting, and I explained that I would not be rushing anyone back to work. There was no need, and please, please don't worry. And through that and other things that have happened under COVID-19, I've been very careful to r- give my rationale, explain why I'm thinking of doing things, where the decisions come from, and that helps people immensely, particularly in times of uncertainty. And collaboration. So this protectionism idea, I truly believe in collaboration. So I've been trying to open up events that we hold, trying to work with other people in an even more collaborative way than usual, because I really don't want that protectionism locking in. We can create win-win situations, and that's what leaders do. They don't only think of themselves, they think of um, the wider impacts that they can create, and they think of others. And always have believed, it's part of my value set, I suppose, that if you work with others and you look to the global good, it will reflect on you anyway. You don't need to be protectionist. And then if we move on to that learning new things that we showed on the previous slide. Well, I'd like to just then talk about learning as part of 5 resilience builders that I find really, really helpful. And the scientific evidence behind this is research that shows that you can build your resilience. That is your ability to face stresses that come on you from day to day. You can build those by doing a number of things. There's lots of theory around this, but 5 of the ones that I really like are learning. And you might think in times of chaos, times when you're really, really busier than ever before, that it's difficult to do this and it's one more task. And you really mustn't force yourself to do something that you don't feel ready for. You mustn't feel guilty about anything. But there are ways of just learning, reading something new, switching off what you're doing and turning to something else, reading an article, Googling something, finding out something new, or doing a qualification, even if you feel that that's for you. That builds resilience because your mind is doing something different and it's shown to really help. Being in the present, similarly, just grounding yourself and just thinking of now, no regrets about the past, no if onlys, and no worries about the future, just focusing on the present, the moment you're in now. And as I'm speaking, maybe you're really focusing on my words, but maybe you're also worrying about how you're going to get that online delivery come later, or will you be having to go back into the office soon, or what was that thing you did earlier that you're not really happy about? And we all do this. The mind finds it quite difficult to focus on the present, but with practice, like anything else, with practice, you can become good at this. Giving, and I'll come on to this a bit later, giving is also shown. If you give to others, you build your resilience. And activity. We've often been encouraged, those of us who've been under lockdown, encouraged to go out and have exercise every day. That's really important to our health. And I'd also add, really think about your diet, your nutrition, that you're getting the right vitamins, that you're drinking enough water, and sleep. Sleep is really important. All these real basics can make a huge difference to how you feel. So we mustn't just take them lightly. Let's really think and plan. Take it seriously like you would any work project, perhaps. Plan how are you going to have your activity? How are you going to eat? How are you going to look after yourself to get yourself in the best possible mental state? Because it's really, really important that you stay healthy through these times. And it's really important that leaders encourage their teams to behave in that way and address that. So then friends and family is the 5th one, and it's really again shown that to have at least 3 social interventions, networks, people you can turn to at any one time. And although it might be challenging at the moment, it's not impossible. We can use technology and we should use technology because it can open up new worlds to us, in fact. So then looking at, I can't go through all of these in detail, but if we just look a little bit further down, we can see that, again, I mentioned collaboration in connection with solidarity and humour and this win-win idea. Um, of course, what I'm doing in the ACT is addressing that shock to the economy. We're advocating for treasures. We're advocating for more government schemes to help people in the UK and around the world. So there's lots that we're doing there. And we've got a COVID-19 page on our website. You can look there if you so wish. That's my day job, if you like. That's my helping our treasurers to survive this shock to the economy. But there are other areas that I'd like to focus on more today. So when we looked on the previous slide about maybe going back to our values, well, it's now time to really look and think of our own vision for the future, both as a leader, of our team, of our family, of whoever it happens to be, or a peer. But what is our vision for the future, and what have we learned through these times? Have we taken some time out to meditate, to reflect, and look at what we really value in life? What are the things that we're seeing that we appreciate? Whether it's going back more to nature, whether it's seeing the leaders that we admire because of their values and we'd like to emulate, but looking at that, this is a time where we can actually think, well, what is the new normal for us personally and for our organization? Do we want to go back to what we were before, or are we going to be like a phoenix, I suppose, arising from the ashes? We come out as something new. So that's something, again, I think that I've certainly been reflecting on, and how, you know, I am going to be in the future, and how I'm going to lead my team in the future, and how my organization will be in the future. Then, just briefly on fear. Fear is a really funny one, because sometimes it's not fear itself that's the problem, it's the fear of the fear, if that makes any sense. And here I think we can really ground ourselves by exploring that and just facing it, examining it, and saying, well, what are you? Why am I feeling this way? What are you really? And by looking fear in the face, if you like, we can start to come to terms with it. We can have exercises in meditation, but we can also just think practically, unless we are unfortunate enough to have contracted COVID-19, be very ill, we can say that this situation around us, this economic shock, etc., it's not going to kill us. We will survive. And just face that and calm ourselves, because fear is destructive. And when fear comes into the body, we have adrenaline, and adrenaline, there's brings out certain things in us to help us survive. But what it also does is it shuts down our um, uh, listening skills and our visual skills. We see less and we hear less when we're panicking, and we don't make good decisions, therefore. So we need to remove that fear as much as we can and calm ourselves and focus on what we can do, what we can change, what we can impact. And isolation, we can include other people. Watch for the signs when people go a bit quiet, and you can notice this virtually when they're not engaging as much. Then we need to try and help them to come out again, to show themselves, because it could be a sign that they're suffering. It's a delicate one, and we have to treat each situation on its own. But it's something I think we need to be very aware of. How are others feeling? Check in on people, make time for them, and separate the business conversation from the one, how are you doing? Don't wrap up the conversation, how are you doing? And have you done that bit of work for me yet, by the way? Set aside special meetings that are about how are you? How are you feeling? How are you coping? And keep them separate from the business stuff. Then, moving on to this COVID coaster idea. Our own and others' moods are really important in this situation. And managing our own moods and motivations, I'd like to move on to a wonderful model that was developed by Bradford K. Brown, um, uh, sadly passed now, but he was inspirational, I think, coming up with this. It's really helped me through my life, and I'd like to share it with you. So this model starts out by saying, we can find ourselves in a situation of impossibility at times. And it's that situation where we're saying, I just can't do that. And I'm sure many of us recognize this. And a slightly better state to find ourselves in is survival. I just have to. It's not as bad as I can't, but we're driven by I just have to. I'll die if I don't. That's an expression we use. I'll die if I don't. And of course, we're not going to die. Obligation, again, slightly better state to find ourselves in. And it's kind of, I should do that. When I worked for Unilever, which was the time when I discovered this model, first of all, and most of Unilever would have been acting motivated in this kind of, in this particular box. I have to have. You really want something and you're driven and you get it. And I like to liken this to shoe shopping. So I see that wonderful pair of shoes in the shop window, or now online. And I think I have to have them. And of course, I get those shoes, and I take them home. And then what happens? And I usually ask this when I'm live with people, and I get a few responses. But generally speaking, the responses are, well, they stay in the cupboard. I don't really like them after all. I feel a bit guilty about it. And what do? I go online and I find the next pair of shoes. So you're never really satisfied. It's a kind of feeling of compulsion. You get things done, you're effective, but you're never really, really satisfied. So then we come on to the best motivational state to be in, which we call the zone or willingness. And that's where we're really open and we're listening. And I'll come back to listening a little bit later. But we're really taking things in. We're open minded. And I liken this to going into a meeting with my view, we're going in to negotiate something, to come up with a decision on something. I have a view, of course, but I go in and I try to put my view to one side and really, really focus on what other people are saying. And by doing so, you're really taking in new ideas, you're not blocking things with your own thoughts. And generally speaking, when you're in that zone, there's creativity, um, there's fun, um, you are relaxed and awake and at ease, and you're connected and purposeful. And you come out with a win win situation. Often you'll come out of that meeting with something different from what you came in with. So I find this a really important model. And you may think, well, what if I'm feeling that survival? I just have to. How do I get into the zone? And the strange thing is, with just having laid this out, you can actually decide to. So I can say to myself, Caroline, you're just not in a good frame at the moment. It's not going to do you any good. You know that. So why don't you just try and get yourself into the zone? And I can do that now. I can decide to change my motivational state, if you like, because I don't want to be making poor decisions. And I know I've experienced the zone. So why can't I just do it again? And it's incredible what the mind can do. As somebody once said, it's only 10% of what happens to us. Uh, so, just on that point, a very quick canter through the next few slides. We have those boxes, we have something happen to us, and we have a reaction that puts us in one of those boxes. So we're either in survival or desire or whatever. So something, one of those days where something happened, you're feeling really bad, and you can pin it down to this thing happened, and that was my reaction, and I'm feeling bad because of it, or I'm not performing at my best because of it. But there's this other aspect, the mind. So it's not only the event, our mind is involved in this very much and is a great influencer, of course. So the question is it the thing that happened that makes us react one way? He made me do it, she made me do it. Or is it our mind actually that makes us do it? And again, you may be coming up with your own conclusion here. I will tell you what research says, and research says it is absolutely the mind. And we often have this little snake sitting on our shoulder, whispering in our ear, saying, you're not good enough. They really don't like you, and all those other things, those negatives. And women particularly are susceptible to that. Again, it's shown through research. So again, we can control our mind. We can actually work with our mind to to decide what state we want to be in. And so that's what I would encourage you to think about. If you find yourself in any of those states, you control your mind. And I'll come back to a few other tips and tricks as to how we can do that in a moment. But just to conclude a little on the mind map, um, this idea of having more contact with other people, I would really urge people to explore um, and enjoy differences. It's World Day of Cultural Difference this coming Thursday. Through virtual technology, we can be everywhere at the same time. And I would really encourage you to look at that and really exploit that now, because we have time. We're learning about people. We're starting that conversation with, how are you? Are you working from home? What was it like? Oh, is that your cat in the background? Or, oh, you've got a young child. Oh, what's that like? And we learn so much about each other. So it's a real opportunity we've never had in the business context before. And just moving on to virtual meetings and working from home, very briefly, last couple of slides. How do we make them successful? And what is leadership? Well, listening. We hear it all the time. You should listen better. We should listen better. But do we actually do it? So it comes back to this being in the present. And actually, I give a quote there from the Bible: "Who are last are first." But it's not meant to be flippant in any way. By listening to others first, you can gain a lot of knowledge before you actually make your point. You don't have to be first. You will always get your moment. And with listening, practice really does make perfect. So if you set yourself out a plan, my listening plan, my how I'm going to be better at listening, and really pull yourself into the present and really listen to people, you will get better and better at it. And you will observe a change in other people because they will like you listening to them. And how do you engage? Yeah, there's lots of different thoughts, but I think for me, using the camera, maybe using some fun backgrounds to engage with people in a discussion, but also not hiding behind the camera in your pajamas. I mean, there's sometimes time for that, but really engaging. I'm finding I can engage with a person across the screen and almost now feel like I'm in the same room with them. It's it it's just, again, it comes with practice. All these things come with practice. As an ex-musician, I know that is the most important thing. Doing things a lot of time, repeating in small chunks. Inclusion as well, ensuring that people engage, inviting them to speak, thinking about who is there and are they showing up. And smiling, you'll feel so much happier, and you'll also encourage other people. So that's a strong recommendation of mine, the smiling. Now, final thoughts before we go into Q&A. You know, life balance we're talking about working from home, it's again, it's in the mind. I can talk another time about some stories and how I had a revelation when I was much younger than now, but about work-life balance, and it's about life balance, and it's being happy that makes the difference for me. And mantras, again, if you look at, I have a lot of podcasts that you can access for free at treasures.org, Strategic Insights podcasts. Um, Mantras, telling your mind something will make it happen. It's incredible. And there's, solid research behind this. It really does work. Remembering things that, COVID-19 is not evil. And tomorrow will be another day. Things will be different, but we will survive. And don't feel guilty. This is one thing, particularly for women. And I'm saying here, I do it myself, thinking about things that I should have done, would have done. I'm getting better at it, but it is a constant piece of work that I have to, I just keep having to battle on with this one. But I'm getting so much better, and positivity entered my life about 20 years ago, and it's stayed, and that's made a huge difference to me. Baby steps, not pushing yourself too hard. And then I love this quote. So when we do look back, did we live our values? I think is the question I would additionally ask. Did you live your values? And if you lived your values, whatever they are, we all have different sets of values. They are not the same. You might think they're obvious, but they're not. If you lived your values, then I think you can look back and be proud of yourself as a leader. So I'm going to stop there. There's a holding slide there in case you wanted to look up anything, but I'm going to now go back and stop sharing the screen and hope that I'm coming back into the Q&A.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much, Caroline. It was very, very insightful. And we're moving up to the Q&A now, and we have lots of questions. So the idea for you now is, in a very short period of time, is to answer to all of them. Let's try to do that. So the first question is, Caroline, how have you seen the workforce impacted in their personal life? Has COVID severely impacted their productivity as well? What's your think?
I think it's very variable. I see people who are in small houses with young children, two people working, that are finding it incredibly difficult to be productive, and they're feeling guilty. And I'm saying, do just the necessary, do what you can. Don't worry, it's all okay. There are other people who are finding it immensely productive. No commute, they're loving it. I think the vast majority of people I speak to say, actually, we'd like to do this a lot more. So I think it really does depend on circumstance, but I would say in general, we're going to see a lot more people more productive at home in the future.
So coming up to the next question, what do you think a world post-pandemic will look like?
Okay, I think it will be very different. I think we have a risk that there will be quite a bit of protectionism. So different geographies will try to go it alone and be self-sufficient. And there may be less of a globalization in that aspect. But I also think that there will be more globalization. We are using technology more than ever before. We've proven, the banks regulators were saying, oh, you can't work from home. Well, they can. The banks are working from home. it's proven. So a lot of those things that people said that, or that people can't be productive at home, or they're not really working, that's proven to be wrong. So I think there's going to be a real, I would suggest a globalization, a getting to know people, the far corners of the earth, but still people want contact with each other.
Yes, totally right. Another question, considering your wide range of experience, is this the most challenging time period for you?
I would say on one level, yes. I think the pandemic, I used to be responsible for planning the business continuity stuff, the pilots for Unilever across Asia. And I remember always saying pandemic would be the worst ever thing because it hits everything. People are dying, and it's hitting the supply chain, and it's just, everything is happening at once. So it is huge. I would say personally, possibly not. I think on the one hand, yes, my sense of responsibility for my organization, how can I, without our live events, which really do underpin what we do and provide the funding for so many other things as a not-for-profit, how, if this continues into next year, how can I help my organization survive? That is an immense concern to me, a problem to me that I feel as a leader, I need to be able to resolve that. That's huge. I would say, however, though, if I look back on my life, I think there've been periods where I've struggled with things personally. I've been at a low, and in a funny sense now, I feel like it's my time to show leadership and what I can do and help those around me. And that's my focus. And actually, I feel kind of privileged, in a strange way, privileged to be able to have an impact and maybe help others. And our big focus on mental health, we've been doing all sorts on mental health, and there are podcasts and different things we've been doing. And in our International Treasury Week last week, we did a lot on it, and stuff on ESG as well. And I feel that I'm hoping, and in this talk, just if people get a few nuggets that can help them in their lives, then I feel I've made an impact. So in that way, it's a real privilege to be in this time, if that makes sense.
So thanks very much for what you're doing. And in the same way, in the current scenario, most of the people, as you said, are going through a stage of anxiety, fear. In your opinion, does anxiety impact differently to men and women? And what would you advise women specifically?
It's an interesting one. I think my experience of many years in the business world, uncertainty really, really bothers men. Something out of control, the results not being as good as they liked, and this is a generalization, but I've noticed that in those times of uncertainty, women tend to be a little bit calmer. But what I've also noticed is in these times of uncertainty, and when we're working virtually, women aren't showing up as much. So that's an interesting factor. Though, of course, as you've highlighted, some of our political leaders who are female seem to have been doing very good jobs of showing up and leading and dealing with uncertainty. I think it applies to men and women. But I think if you hold to your values, whether male or female or whatever gender, I think if you hold to your values and are true to those, then you deal with uncertainty better.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, but I'll have one more question, and we have two, but you'll have to answer in 1 minute. So my first question in 1 minute, how do you see change leadership post-COVID, especially in banking function?
Change leadership. Again, I think leadership is about focusing on the people and not focusing necessarily on the profits. And I think they follow.
Yes. And the last one, before we move to the networking, is what would be your best book that you've ever read?
Funnily enough, we had a virtual book club last night, and there are so many. But one that I love that is sheer fantasy, but it is about good over evil, and it is about leadership, actually, is Lord of the Rings by Tolkien.
Okay. No, thanks very much, Caroline. Thanks for sharing, your points about leadership. I love your mind map. It was very insightful. What triggers me, what you said, is I speak to a lot of people, alumni, CEOs of banks, people in innovation, everyone. And one thing that comes at the moment, nobody says it, but as you said it, people is afraid of change. Most of the people, they're afraid of change. I'm sometimes afraid of change also. I realize that the fear of the unknown is the most important element of people's behavior during the time of change. Australia try to make people understand what's in it for them, what they could expect, and how they'll benefit from the fact that the company soon will be in a different place and the way they work will change as well. It's important to make people see that what that we will be doing has not changed, but how that we will do things in changing all the time. So I think it's all come to us. You said it, having the right balance, taking care of ourselves, and I think having the right mindset. Thanks very much, Caroline. Thanks very much for all of you, to join us.